Hello, everybody. We have Mr. Srivatsan Iyer. He's Global CEO, Hero Futures Energy. Hello, Mr. Iyer, and welcome to Business World.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on this interview.
Thank you for taking the time out. I understand it's a Friday evening, and it's probably the last of the interactions that you are doing for the week. But I appreciate that you took the time out at the end of the week to speak with us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here again. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you that there is a rise in the geopolitical risks like disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. And is India underestimating energy security concerns while accelerating its renewable push?
Uh, so before I go into, I guess, India specific response, let's kind of go back over the last 6, 7 decades, right? These kind of what we used to call black swan events used to happen once every 2 to 3 decades, right? But if you really just look back over the last 20 years, 2001, we had the dot-com bust that impacted, yeah, I'd say, all global economies, right? Uh, 10 years later, we had the banking crisis, global banking crisis that impacted all economies globally. 10 years later, we had COVID that came and that impacted, I guess, all global economies. 6 years later, now we have a crisis in the Middle East that's again impacting everybody. So it's the magnitude and frequency of these events that are happening at a far greater frequency and severity as well. I think part of that has driven all countries globally and definitely India to look for self-reliance, at least in terms of critical economic drivers. And energy definitely is one of them. India is one of the countries in the world that's reliant almost entirely on energy imports in one form or the other. Right? Our domestic production of energy relative to our demand is still fairly small. Uh, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think the government 5 years back came out with its own target for renewable energy and targets of 500 gigawatts by 2030 and so on and so forth. And what we're hearing now from the government in terms of not just the austerity measures that are being requested, but also in terms of the new push being given to alternate forms of energy, I think is a response to the fact that this is not a 6 month event or geopolitical crisis that will go away, but this is now permanent fixture of global geopolitics, where countries have to be able to survive and grow in spite of events like this. In fact, interestingly, the transport minister recently came out and said there is no future for petrol and diesel cars in India anymore, right? Which is actually a massive announcement given the growth of, I'd say, conventional cars in India or conventional vehicles in India that are driven by petrol and diesel. So as a country, we absolutely have to look to be self-sufficient. India is one of the countries that has 365 days of, I'd say, good solar radiation across the country, right? Unlike Western Europe and Northern America, where the winter months, anywhere from 4 to 7 months, you have almost no solar radiation. India basically has 365 days of radiation, of course, notwithstanding monsoon season for a few weeks and so on and so forth, right? And so there's two drivers, I think, for India. One is try to electrify as much as you can. Everything that can be electrified should be electrified. And number two is if things cannot be electrified, can you use renewable energy to convert some input material into fuels that can be used in non-electric applications, right? E-fuels, for example. Can you make liquid fuels using renewable energy? And I think that's kind of the focus of the government. And we're seeing a series of policy announcements. We're seeing a lot of focus really driven by attaining energy self-sufficiency in a very geopolitically volatile.
When we talk about renewable capacity addition in India, it is pretty strong, especially last year. But the problem is curtailment, which still persists. So,
Mhm.
are we overbuilding generation without fixing utilization and grid absorption?
It's a great question, but it's, I guess, there's two different pieces of infrastructure that need to come together. Uh, by its nature, renewable energy is a two-year process, right, from concept or from start to finish. Transmission networks, unfortunately, take 4, 5, 6 years because you're running thousands of kilometers and you have to connect all parts of India. So it's a timing mismatch. And what really we are seeing in curtailment now is a result of the generation coming slightly ahead of the transmission infra coming online. Those eventually will match, but I think that timing mismatch is likely to stay for a while. That doesn't mean we should slow down our pace of development. The other area that I think, again, India is focusing on largely, which is one way to mitigate to a limit or to an extent this curtailment, which happens because generation exceeds transmission, is to have distributed generation around the country. And we have the PM Surya Ghar Yojana, for example, that definitely is going to increase what I'm going to call distributed generation, where people set it up on their own rooftops or in their own villages or in their own towns. And that will lessen the need for creating, I'd say, large transmission infrastructure as well. So the solution is all of the above, because we typically tend to think of let's do this or should we do this. I think India is at a point now when it's not or, it is and. We continue to build large scale renewable energy, large scale transmission infra, but we also continue to build distributed energy that reduces the impact on building transmission infrastructure, but also makes people more self sufficient at a more granular level.
One of the Achilles heel, I would say, of the renewable sector is the delayed payments from discoms, which is a continuing issue. At what point does this become a serious financing risk for renewable developers?
So I think, I'm trying to think, 3 years back, I think the Ministry of Power came up with the Prapti Portal scheme, where power producers could go and record what were the receivables from discoms. And that scheme has essentially, I'd say, mitigated the impact of late payments. Over the last 3 years, actually the track record of most state discoms is they are paying on time, right? And part of, I guess, the consequence mechanism of the Prapti portal is actually forcing them to pay on time. However, the structural issues may still persist, right? Which is they are paying on time, but if their continued revenues are still a shortfall relative to their continued costs, the financial stress on the discoms are going to continue to be there, right, going forward. And I think there's multiple solutions to this, obviously, but clearly modernization, more investment in smart metering and grid infrastructure to prevent losses and theft, for example. All of this are also happening. And of course, privatization, right? And if you look at the private discoms, they are not only financially, I'd say, viable and solid, but they also have no payment problems, right? So again, this is a path that's going to take a few years to solve. But the good news is I think we are seeing that effort being made in every state to make the state discoms more financially viable.
Another key aspect of energy or source of energy these days in the news is green hydrogen. It is gaining more and more attention, but its economics is yet to be consolidated. It remains uncertain. So is the industry moving ahead faster than the viability allows?
I think the industry is moving ahead faster only in terms of announcements and on paper, right? We're actually seeing very little capacity come on the ground, right? So let's be perfectly clear there. A lot of energy, a lot of sound, a lot of noise, but not a whole lot of progress. In fact, I would step out and say we are one of the few companies that actually set up a green hydrogen plant and are operating it effectively even today, right? I don't think there's very many companies that can actually say that, though many of them come out in public and make announcements. You're absolutely right. The economics are still challenging. Though the good news is with the specific green hydrogen policies being promoted by various states in terms of reducing some of the, I'd say, economic barriers, we're going to start to see green hydrogen get more in the money, right? And that's happening in a few states, and I think the rest of the states are falling in place. And number two is just technology improvement. As the electrolyzer capex continues to reduce, as electrolyzer efficiency continues to improve, we're going to start to see green hydrogen come in the money. It is going to take time. So let's not be overly optimistic. This is, in the end, a similar journey to what solar went through back from 2010s, when tariffs in solar were, 6 rupees plus, to today, it's 2 to 250. And that same evolution is happening, or I'm optimistic will happen in green hydrogen as well, where 5 years back we were at, let's call it, $5 a kg, and today we are down to, $3 a kg, right? And so we expect that trajectory to continue. So we'll start to see a tipping point on hydrogen, I suspect, 3 years from now, when, the costs get be on par. But on the flip side, what we are seeing from the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East is the government might look at green hydrogen and say this is now strategic importance, again, as a view to energy self-reliance and self-sufficiency. And if they, I'd say, give further support to the green hydrogen industry, not in terms of financial support, but in terms of removing some of the barriers, right? And I think that alone will suffice in India. We're not looking for handouts. We're just looking to reduce some of the duties and tariffs and the surcharges and so on. If those come down, I think green hydrogen can stand on its own 2 feet.
Another evolving, I wouldn't call it really an issue, but I would say the principle of the market is that renewable sector is heading towards consolidation, where is it a possibility that only large players are going to survive because the competition is increasing and the returns are compressing? So what is your prediction regarding the upcoming players in the renewable sector?
We've seen some consolidation, definitely. We've seen some large buyouts, actually, even over the last 2 years. At the same time, we've seen a lot of new players come up, right? And these new players are both from leading promoter houses as well as, I'd say, individual entrepreneurs who are building up, right? So if you were to look at the list of renewable energy companies who go for meetings with MNRE, the list is almost 50 now, right? So it's not trivial. I don't see large-scale consolidation happening anytime soon. I think the market is so large. We need to build out, let's call it another 500 gigawatts over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yes.
It is not a marketplace for 6 companies. This is a marketplace for many more companies. And number 2 is there might start to be a market segmentation where some players play only in the large utility space, some play only in the C&I space, and some play only the residential and rooftop space, right? And I think that would be a good progression to the market if that happens. But we already see that kind of regrouping happening in the market today.
Another form of energy that is now gaining traction is wind energy. It's witnessing a revival after years of slowdown. What has actually changed to drive this shift? Because ground level issues, whether it is in terms of land acquisition or policy front, we haven't really seen a major shift. Yet this form of energy is now gaining traction if we see in the last 1 month. So what's really driving this shift?
I think the shift was catalyzed, I'd say 2 years back, right? Or more than that, actually 3 years back, when the REIAs came out with complex bids and tenders that required either round the clock or load following, what was called FDRE or peak power. Those types of tenders, and again, I'll go back to the question you raised about curtailment, right? And part of the reason curtailment is happening is we're overbuilding solar. So for 8 hours, you've got plenty of power. And then suddenly when the sun goes down, there's nothing, right? And the transmission infra is unused, essentially, right? And so also to mitigate that and to supply, I'm going to call it round the clock power. Now, it may not be steady round the clock, but it's at least in every time slot over a full year. Wind is absolutely essential. Right? We are not at a point where we can do 8 hours of solar and 16 hours of storage.
Okay.
So what we have to do is 8 hours of solar, let's call it 8 to 10 hours of wind, and the balance with storage. And so wind has to be a crucial player for us to supply round the clock renewable energy. And that's the reason I think the REIA started to bid out these types of complex tenders 3 years back. And that's the reason wind is back again, I'd say, as a relevant player in this spectrum. That being said, India has been in many ways, a mature player in wind, right? Some of the old wind turbines are almost 30 years old now, or 20 plus years old. They occupy some of the best wind zones in India, but they're also among the oldest turbines in India, right? So these are 200 kilowatt turbines as opposed to 5 megawatt turbines that are available in the market today. What I think the industry is really looking for is a coherent repowering policy where we can use those really, really good wind sites to put new turbines that can generate a whole lot more power, rather than look for, I'm going to call it loosely, second-tier wind sites, which is what the industry is forced to do today.
Right. And we also spoke about adding 500 gigawatts by 2030, which has also been the current government's renewable target. What could be one key constraint, according to you, that could derail this goal of India's renewable target? What would it be and why?
I'd say there's 3 primary barriers, right? One is just, I'm going to call it geopolitics. India is still, in many ways, largely reliant on global supply chains for all of the equipment that's needed for renewable energy in one form or the other. Now, clearly, there's a push with PLI and ALMM and ALCM to bring a lot of that manufacturing here, but it's not going to develop by 2030, right? Let's be clear, because these investments are large and they take time. So one is just geopolitics. We hope that the world settles down and the volatility settles down and countries work actively and cooperatively with each other. But that is a source of uncertainty, right? Number two is just the pace of transmission infra development. I'm not talking whether it will come. It will definitely come, but will it come at the same pace to allow 500 gigawatts of generation to be able to be evacuated, right? And that timing mismatch might be plus minus, let's call it 12, 18 months, but it's not going to be any more severe than that. And third is, and everybody in the industry keeps talking about is, can we find the good wind locations? Can we simplify land acquisition in India, right? But these are more ground level problems. I don't look at them as barriers. They just, I'd say, normal course of business, but they do offer, certain barriers in terms of timing to come up on time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Iyer, for joining us and sharing your inputs. And I would wish you a great weekend ahead.
Absolutely. Have a good weekend and thanks for having me.